If you're new to the channel, please hit subscribe for daily boxing commentary. Now, last night I made a video, basically, I guess you can say, trolling the whole idea that David Price and Alexander Povetkin might fight on the undercard of Joseph Parker versus Anthony Joshua. I was acting like it was suicide for David Price to get in the ring with Alexander Povetkin for the fact that he has a very bad chin, and I believe that Povetkin, if he's able to land, and pretty much any heavyweight is able to land, it could be a very disastrous night for David Price, and I felt like he needed to rebuild himself. But at the end of the day, David Price is a professional fighter. He's not a cab driver. This is not like Alexander Povetkin's fighting some guy off the street. He's fighting a professional fighter. David Price, I actually think, has the tools to beat Alexander Povetkin. First of all, I want to show you guys something. Now, I want you guys to see this picture. Now, this is Tyson Fury, right? And his cousin Hughie Fury standing next to Alexander Povetkin. Now, as you can see, there is a massive height difference between Alexander Povetkin and both Hughie Fury and Tyson Fury. I mean, and why I think this is significant is David Price is the same height of Tyson Fury. In fact, sometimes he looks taller. There's several pictures online where you see David Price taking a picture next to Tyson Fury, and in some photos, Tyson Fury looks shorter than David Price. So, if this fight actually happens now, when David Price is standing next to Alexander Povetkin, this is basically the height difference. I believe David Price is listed at 6'8", and I believe Alexander Povetkin is a short heavyweight. He's about 6'1", 6'2". So there is about like a 6 to 7 inch height difference, right? So that is an advantage for David Price because he's much taller and he has, I believe, he has the longer reach, right? So I believe the way to beat Alexander Povetkin is, especially if you're a tall heavyweight, is to use that size and that height and that reach to your advantage. Keep him at bay with that jab, and if you can, and if you have good enough footwork, outbox the guy. Keep it long. Play the matador. Outbox him. Does David Price have the foot speed to do that? I don't know. He's not necessarily the fastest guy. I think if David Price fights that way, fights the way Lennox Lewis fought, like say David Tuick perhaps, something like to that extent, I think if he fights that way and attempts to use his height and reach to his advantage, I think he could actually pull off the upset and beat Alexander Povetkin. The problem that David Price has is, I don't know if he has the fastest foot speed because it seems as though fighters are able to get on the inside against him. And when they get on the inside against him, and he's pinned against the ropes, and they start letting their combinations go, that's when everything basically goes downhill. I've always felt that David Price doesn't like inside fighting. Even in his last fight against that journeyman, every time that journeyman got on the inside and he would let his hands go, he was able to clip David Price a few times, but David Price would hold on. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Why would I think that David Price could win when you know he doesn't have the best chin? And you know if these journeymans could get on the inside, if Alexander Povetkin went on the inside and lands, he'll be able to hands down stop David Price. Well, here's the thing. Alexander Povetkin really hasn't been looking that devastating ever since he was caught with steroids. If you guys remember, prior before he was caught with steroids, he was really in a knockout streak. He was knocking everybody he fought out brutally, right? Then he gets caught with PEDs, and he really hasn't been looking that, incredible. Let's just say, against Christian Hammer, he didn't look that incredible in that fight. Didn't look that great in that fight. Looked average. We also have to keep in mind the fact that he's 39, so he's really at the end of his career. It's not like he's a young heavyweight. You know, you could say that has to do with the fact that he's clean now. He's not on steroids. You could also say that has to do with the fact that, you know, he's 39. So when it comes to David Price, he has the youth and he has the size advantage, right? Because he's like, I believe, 5 years younger than David and Alexander Povetkin. Also, he will have the hometown advantage because it's going to happen in the UK. Obviously, that won't matter because you just have to land on David Price's chin. But I think that if David Price, and also David Price is a puncher. At least I've been told. Everyone keeps telling me he's a puncher. Don't sleep on his punching power. You know, he's a puncher. He's a puncher. I just feel if David Price wants to beat Alexander Povetkin, he has to fight the way Lennox Lewis fought. What's his name? David Tua. Keep it long, keep it rangy. He has all the advantages over Alexander Povetkin. The biggest thing is, like I said, the fact that I don't know if he's fast enough to keep away from Alexander Povetkin, A, and B, his chin. His chin has to be the number one thing. But like I said, I do think he can if he's able to stick to a game plan and just not engage Povetkin that much. Even if it's a stinker, even if it's a negative fight. I think if he fights negative, that's a one, you know, even though I'm against negative fighting styles like, you know, Hughie Fury, I think if he fights that way, like Hughie Fury fights, I think he could actually pull it off. He could. And it would be amazing. You know, that would be like a Cinderella story. Can you imagine if David Price beat Alexander Povetkin in Cardiff, Wales on the undercard of an Anthony Joshua fight? That would be like a Cinderella story because going into that fight, everybody would expect him to get blown out of there, knocked out, you know, in front of like 60,000 people. So imagine if he pulls it off and, you know, defeats Alexander Povetkin in front of all these people. That would be like a fairy tale. After being knocked out by lower level guys, that would be like a fairy tale, right? And I've gone around, you know, trolling David Price, saying, you know, Alexander Povetkin is gonna just brutally knock him out. But it would be nice to see, I guess, like an upset from an underdog that is supposed to be blown out the water. And many upsets have happened in boxing, so I'm not gonna sit here and say it's impossible for David Price to beat Alexander Povetkin because it's not. I mean, Buster Douglas beat Mike Tyson, and Douglas didn't have the height and reach advantage that someone like David Price has over Alexander Povetkin. Douglas was like, only 2 inches taller than someone like Mike Tyson. And that was a prime Mike Tyson. Think about that for a second. Buster Douglas beat a prime Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson, when he was, you know, knocking everybody out, chaos. Dude was knocking everybody out. He was a vicious type of fighter. So if a Buster Douglas could beat a prime Mike Tyson, why couldn't David Price be a Alexander Povetkin who's not in his prime, who's at the end of his career, 39, and who's nowhere near as fast as Tyson? And you know, and like I said, he's much bigger than Povetkin. Like, he's way bigger, at least 6-7 inches taller. So I'm not counting out the possibilities of him pulling off the upset. And it would be, like I said, it would be a great Cinderella story for someone like David Price, especially how his career panned out. He was supposed to be something, then, you know, he lost to guys he maybe shouldn't have, and then he comes back and beats, you know, a guy like Alexander Povetkin, and, you know, it'll be really a fairy tale type of story. So that's just my opinion on this, guys. And if you guys watched the whole video from start to finish, I do appreciate it. I'm out.